No one becomes rich because a business sounds exciting. That is one of the first things life taught me, and one of the last things the public wants to hear. People are drawn to glamour the way moths are drawn to light. They hear artificial intelligence, biotech, private rockets, crypto, media brands, luxury consumer platforms, celebrity-backed products, and the rest of the fashionable parade, and they assume the real money must live there. They think wealth belongs to whatever feels modern, difficult, admired, and dramatic. Most of the great fortunes I have seen were built in far quieter places than that. They were built where human need repeats. They were built where the customer does not wake up each morning wanting novelty. He wants the same problem solved again. He wants the same bill handled again. He wants the same machine working again. He wants the same interruption removed from his life with as little emotion as possible. That is where dull businesses become beautiful. A business does not have to be entertaining to be valuable. In fact, entertainment is often a poor sign. The more a business depends on excitement, the more it depends on fashion, timing, and public mood. The more a business depends on routine need, the more it begins to resemble a toll bridge. And I have always liked toll bridges better than circuses. If I were starting over today with very little money and no appetite for acting clever, I would not go looking for the most impressive business in the room. I would go looking for a boring business that solves an ordinary problem repeatedly, with decent margins, local trust, and room to scale by system, rather than by genius. That is a very different search. It does not flatter the ego much at first. It also tends to produce cash much earlier, and cash is what keeps a business alive long enough to become something larger. I learned very early that the world pays not only for brilliance, it pays for reliability. Reliability is one of the great underpriced assets in capitalism. A reliable service delivered where people need it, in a business where demand reappears every week or every month, can make a man rich while flashier operators are still rehearsing their pitch deck. That is why I want to talk about boring businesses. Not because I think every ordinary service route is a gold mine. Not because there is no risk. Not because a bucket, a truck, or an air compressor is somehow magical. I want to talk about them because the logic underneath them is the logic I trust. Low drama, clear demand, repeat payments, local proof, then systems, then scale. That order matters more than most people realize. The public usually wants to start with scale. They want to imagine the end before they have handled the beginning. They want 10 locations, a national brand, franchise economics, private equity multiples, and all the rest before they have even solved the first and most humiliating question in business. Can I get one customer to pay me? That is the beginning of all honest commerce. Until that happens, a lot of what people call entrepreneurship is just costume jewelry. It shines, but it does not hold value. If I were a young man again with modest savings and a strong desire to stop selling all my time for money, I would not begin by asking what business sounds coolest. I would begin with a simpler question. What annoying, repeated, necessary job exists around me right now that people will pay a premium to have handled dependably? That question sends you into a completely different part of the map. It sends you toward laundromats, route businesses, service contractors, equipment rentals, towing, niche maintenance, waste handling, janitorial work, simple distribution, small facilities, businesses, local logistics, filter changes, window cleaning, and a dozen other categories that make almost nobody feel like a visionary and quietly make a lot of owners very wealthy. The first reason these businesses are so attractive is not that they are passive. I am always suspicious when someone leads with the word passive. Passive is a bait word. It attracts people who want the harvest without respecting the field. A laundromat is not passive if the machines fail, the neighborhood shifts, the water bill rises. Vandalism becomes an issue, or the floor is dirty enough to repel your best customers. An ATM route is not passive if the machines run empty, the cash logistics are sloppy, the host location renegotiates, or the hardware stops functioning on a Friday night. A towing business is not passive if the truck breaks, the driver fails, the insurance is wrong, or the response time gets too slow and your reputation dies in local memory. What these businesses offer is not passivity. They offer repeatability. That is better. Repeatability is one of the foundations of wealth because repeatability can be trained, systematized, delegated, and financed. A one-time exciting win is hard to build on. 1,000 ordinary repeated customer interactions can become a machine. That is what the public misses. It thinks the path to wealth is hidden inside uniqueness. Very often the path is hidden inside repetition. Now, let me tell you what I would look for. First, I would divide the world of boring businesses into two broad camps. The first is property-oriented cash flow. The second is service-based cash flow. Property-oriented businesses tend to appeal to people because the asset appears to do some of the work. A machine sits somewhere and produces fees. A facility exists, and people come to use it. Equipment gets rented. The owner imagines that because the asset is visible and fixed, the income must be easier. Sometimes it is easier. Often it simply means the maintenance burden is being ignored in the sales pitch. Service businesses are the opposite. They usually need less capital to start and more operating discipline to scale. They can be harder to differentiate at first, but if you build systems well, they can become bigger far faster than most property businesses ever will. Both categories can work. I would not worship either. I would ask a more adult question. Which one can I understand, validate locally, start lean, and turn into repeat cash flow without betting the family on a fantasy? That is the standard. Let us begin with one of the simplest examples in property-oriented business. The ATM. People laugh at ATMs now because they think digital payments made the whole subject old-fashioned. Perhaps over very long stretches the world becomes less cash-heavy. Fine. That does not mean there is no business in the transition. And it certainly does not mean that many local merchants stop needing a cash access point for their customers right now. The ATM business looks simple because in one sense it is simple. You place a machine where cash is needed, you keep the machine running, you keep it loaded, you negotiate the location properly, and the surcharge on each withdrawal produces your spread. That is the whole thing. But simplicity should never be confused with effortlessness. The machine location matters enormously. A bad location can turn a machine into dead metal. A good location can turn one into a very decent little earner. And once you understand that, you begin to see the real business. It is not merely owning ATMs. It is controlling access to good placement and maintaining reliability better than the next person. That is what I mean when I say boring businesses often hide their real moat in local execution rather than in some abstract technological advantage. If I were entering that field, I would not buy 10 machines and announce myself an entrepreneur. That is the kind of vanity that gets people punished. I would place one machine in one place where I knew the owner, understood the customer flow, and had a practical plan for keeping cash in the machine and keeping the machine functioning. Then I would watch the economics without lying to myself. How much traffic, how much downtime, how much servicing, how much real profit after everything then, and only then. If the unit economics held, I would add a second, then a third, then a cluster. Scale by proof, not by fantasy. That phrase alone would save a great many small business owners. Laundromats are another classic example of property-oriented cash flow, and for good reason. Laundry is one of those stubborn categories of human necessity that resist being made glamorous. People still need clean clothes. Apartment. Heavy neighborhoods still need accessible machines. Students, lower-income households, transient populations, and even time. Starved ordinary families all continue creating demand. That is the good news. The bad news is that too many buyers stop the analysis there. They think everybody needs clean clothes. Therefore, laundromat equals easy money. No, everybody needs food too. And that has not prevented countless restaurants from going broke. The laundromat business is much more than washers and dryers. It is machine uptime, layout, cleanliness, security, utilities, neighborhood fit, pricing, maintenance, lease terms, payment systems, and above all, location. Location is to a laundromat what circulation is to a newspaper. Without it, the thing may still exist physically, but economically it is dying. I have seen people get seduced by the idea of semi-passive income and ignore the simple truth that a laundromat is really a facilities operation. If the place feels unsafe, the customers will drift. If the machines are often broken, they will drift. If the price is wrong, they will drift. If a better location opens nearby, they will drift. The wise operator does not worship the idea of passive cash flow. He studies the local habit loop. Where do people live? When do they come? What else can they do there? Is there enough parking? What are the machine replacement cycles? Can the pricing absorb future utility costs? Can the space remain attractive enough that a customer does not mind repeating the errand twice a week for years? That is the real work. But again, if you solve those things in one location, and if the economics are solid, then the model can repeat. This is why boring businesses are so powerful. They do not ask you to keep reinventing demand. They ask you to serve recurring demand with discipline. Equipment rental may be one of the most underappreciated boring businesses in America, especially in periods where industrial activity, construction, emergency repair, and localized manufacturing all remain important. Most companies do not want to own every piece of equipment they may need for every event. They need equipment for a period immediately, and are willing to pay dearly if the alternative is operational downtime. That is beautiful economics when it is handled correctly. A man who can deliver a working compressor, lift generator, or specialized machine quickly into a situation where the customer is losing money by the hour has pricing power that most restaurants and trendy consumer brands can only dream about. Urgency changes the conversation. When the customer's plant is down, he is not comparing aesthetic preferences. He is solving pain. Businesses that solve urgent pain often get paid much better than businesses that solve casual curiosity. But once again, the public sees the yield and misses the structure. An equipment rental business is logistics, maintenance, utilization, and local reputation. If the machine does not work, you do not get paid. If the machine is in the wrong place, you do not get paid. If you bought too much gear before validating demand, then capital sits idle and punishes you. If the wrong customer damages equipment and your process is sloppy, your returns vanish fast. So how would I think about such a business? The same way I think about every sound allocation decision. Begin small enough that tuition is survivable. Learn the failure points yourself. Understand how one unit earns before adding 10. If I can rent one compressor, one lift, one skid steer, or one small cluster of equipment into a local industrial ecosystem and keep the utilization high, then I am learning something real. Once I know the true utilization, service cost, delivery friction, and customer acquisition process, only then do I deserve the right to scale. That is another lesson the public hates. Deserving the right to scale sounds too humble. People want to declare scale first and earn it later. They want to buy the truck wrap, the website, the software stack, the uniforms, the fleet, the management chart, the title, and the self-image before the first economics have even settled. That is backwards. A boring business becomes exciting only after the numbers become repeatable. Until then, it is still a question mark. Now let us move to service businesses, because I have always thought that if a young person has skill, hustle, and enough humility to start local, a service business can be one of the fastest, honest paths to real wealth. The reason is very simple. Service businesses are often capital light and knowledge heavy. If you know how to do the work well, you can start small. If you know how to market locally better than the older operators in your town, you can win customers. If you know how to build systems before your own success turns you into the bottleneck, you can scale. The field I would point people toward first is not glamorous. It does not need to be. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, electrical, roofing, pest control, restoration, filter changes, recurring facility, maintenance, and other skilled local services all share a wonderful trait. The work is necessary. People do not buy it to feel modern. They buy it because they need the building to function. Need-based spending is one of the finest things a business can serve. There is a great difference between a customer who wants something and one who needs something. Need usually pays better, repeats more reliably, and survives economic noise with greater dignity. If I were a young person without much capital, I would be very tempted to go into a trade, not because I think every tradesman will become rich automatically, but because the trade gives you three things at once. First, a portable skill. Second, a view into recurring local demand. Third, an operating education in what the actual pain points are inside the business you may later own. That is immensely valuable. Owners who have done the work themselves have an enormous advantage in designing systems that solve the real bottlenecks rather than the imaginary ones. A man who has never done HVAC work may still build a large HVAC company, but he starts one layer removed from reality. A man who knows how service calls fail, how customers describe problems badly, how dispatch friction arises, how technicians waste time, and where margin leaks out, starts much closer to the source. That closeness is worth money, and yet I still would not tell him to quit his job, lease a giant warehouse, and hire 10 technicians on day one. I would tell him what I would tell anyone. Start where the risk is low and the learning is high. Do the work or subcontract carefully while validating demand. Build one local service area where you become known. then systematize, then expand. Too many service businesses die from premature geography. They confuse wider reach with better economics. It is far better to dominate one modest circle than to be mediocre across 5 counties. Local focus is one of the great underappreciated advantages in business building. A national dream can begin with one town, one zip code cluster, one service corridor, one route, one call type, one customer avatar. It should. Domino's did not become Domino's by trying to delight the entire planet at once. It learned one local pattern deeply, then repeated the model. That is what almost every scalable, boring business must do. Learn a narrow system so well that repetition becomes natural. Towing is another wonderful example because it teaches an even harsher lesson about urgency. If your car is stalled on the interstate, or your truck is broken down blocking revenue, you do not begin a spiritual journey of price discovery. You need the problem removed. That is economic leverage. The operator with the right truck, right permitting, right response time, and right local footprint becomes the answer to a problem that has already become expensive for the customer. That is one reason towing can be so attractive. The need is immediate, the barrier is practical, and the service area can be defended through equipment, response quality, and local relationships. But again, let us not lie. It is not easy money. Insurance matters, driver quality, equipment maintenance matters, dispatch matters, safety matters, night work matters, cash discipline matters. Still, if I am looking for a boring service business with urgency economics, towing deserves respect, and what I like most is that it also illustrates a broader truth. The real money often lives in the less obvious subsegment. Light-duty towing is fine. Heavy-duty truck recovery can be an entirely different economic animal. This is true all over boring business land. The novice sees one category. The serious operator sees the valuable niche inside the category. Waste collection offers another lesson in the same family. On the surface, it sounds enormous, capital-heavy, regulated, and dominated by large players. All true. But a local market can still contain neglected slices, service gaps, route inefficiencies, pickup timing frustrations, specialized hauling needs, and other operational openings that a focused operator can exploit. I have always liked businesses where demand is recurring, and the customer would much rather keep paying than think about the subject at all. Waste is like that. Nobody wakes up excited to select a better trash provider. They want the service to happen, the site to stay functional, and the headaches to be absent. That is good business terrain. The beautiful thing about boring categories is that customer indifference to the romance of the subject often makes loyalty easier to earn if your execution is reliably superior. In glamorous categories, everyone has opinions. In boring categories, they mostly want competence. Competence scales nicely. Window cleaning may be the most useful reminder of all because it strips away the excuse that every large business must begin with large capital. It does not. A squeegee, soap, a bucket, hustle, reliability, and local selling ability are enough to begin. The public underestimates these businesses because they start too humbly for the ego. That is precisely why they can work. A man who starts washing windows at a bank is not trying to impress his friends. He is trying to get one honest customer, then another, then another. If he builds route density, trains crews, manages quality, and keeps a strong local reputation, the economics can become astonishing. This is another reason I distrust the obsession with big starts. The largest stories are often born from embarrassingly modest beginnings. The beginning is not where the prestige is. The beginning is where the model is proved, and proof is everything. This brings me to what I think is the most important principle in all of boring business building. Get the first sale before you build the cathedral. The world is full of people who spend months building a website, choosing a logo, selecting colors, designing packaging, renting offices, signing leases, forming entities, and talking themselves into the identity of founder before one customer has ever put real money on the table. I do not admire that. Revenue is truth. Until a customer buys, a great many things are still theoretical. A much wiser path is to validate demand as cheaply and honestly as possible. If you want to sell a product, can you broker or dropship it first and prove that customers actually show up? If you want to sell a service, can you sell the service before building the entire infrastructure? Perhaps by handling fulfillment yourself or partnering temporarily while you prove acquisition works. This may feel slower. It is usually much safer. And safer in the beginning is often smarter. I would far rather see a young entrepreneur spend an extra 6 months proving customer acquisition with almost no capital risk than spend a lot of money early. Because confidence felt good. Confidence does not pay invoices. Customers do. There is a deep moral relief in first revenue because it ends one form of self-deception. You are no longer guessing whether the market cares. You know at least one person cares enough to pay. Now, you may still be wrong about scale, you may still be wrong about margins, you may still be wrong about operations. Fine, at least the first and most embarrassing question has been settled. The market has spoken once. That is precious. From there, you can improve the machine honestly, but without that, the whole thing remains a kind of hopeful theater. Local dominance matters just as much. If I had to choose between being moderately known across a wide area and deeply trusted in one dense pocket, I would choose the dense pocket almost every time in the beginning. Route density reduces travel waste. Local reputation compounds faster. Word of mouth becomes easier. Marketing spend becomes more efficient. Service quality becomes more consistent. Operational headaches become more visible and easier to solve. Most small businesses fail because they try to carry the complexity of scale before they have earned the economics of scale. This is why boring businesses reward focus so much. One neighborhood first, one town first, one corridor first, one type of customer first, then more. Now, I want to say something about wealth itself. People hear these examples and imagine the goal is simply $10,000 a month. Fine. $10,000 a month is wonderful if it is real, durable, and not eating itself through chaos. But the larger point is not the monthly figure. It is the transformation of labor into systems and then systems into capital. That is how real wealth gets built. At first, the owner is the business. He is doing everything. Then he starts documenting, delegating, routinizing, and removing himself from the work that does not require his judgment. Gradually, the business stops being only a job wearing a company name and becomes a machine with cash flow. Then cash flow can purchase more equipment, better people, stronger infrastructure, or even other small businesses. That is where boring gets very beautiful. A dull service route can buy another dull service route. A local maintenance company can acquire a small competitor. An equipment rental outfit can widen its inventory. A waste operator can expand route density. A facilities business can add adjacent services. Boring cash flow is an excellent parent to more boring cash flow. This is the compounding the public does not celebrate because it lacks glamour. I celebrate it because it works. The last thing I would tell anyone trying to build this kind of life is that you do not need to begin with $1 billion plan. In fact, $1 billion plan is often a sign of fantasy at the wrong stage. What you need is one honest customer. Then a second, then a narrow local system that you can explain in plain language, then a service or asset that solves a repeated need, then strong enough unit economics that time makes you stronger instead of more exhausted, then patience, then discipline, then the refusal to expand for vanity, then the willingness to keep the thing boring even after success tempts you to start acting theatrical. I have watched too many good businesses get wrecked by owners who confuse size with health, healthy first, then bigger, never the other way around. So, if I were young again, low on capital, and determined to stop selling all my time forever, I would not spend much time dreaming about the kind of business that sounds exciting when spoken aloud at dinner. I would go looking for one that makes customers yawn and pay. That is usually a very good sign. The yawning means the need is ordinary, the paying means the pain is real, and repeated ordinary pain solved at a fair price is one of the finest foundations I know for a real fortune, not a fantasy. A fortune, that is what I would want. That is where I would look. And that is why I think boring businesses deserve much more respect than the world gives them. They are not boring where it matters. They are predictable where it matters. And predictable cash flow, built on real need, local trust, careful validation, and gradual systemization, is still one of the most beautiful things capital can own.